Well, welcome everyone. My name is Joe Tovar and I'm the Demand Response Product Manager for TripSpark based in sunny Phoenix, Arizona. For those who don't know me, I've been with TrapEase/TripSpark since mid-2005. I started out as a deployment specialist for Novus Demand Response, worked for the school division for a couple of years, and have been working with the product management teams in various markets since 2010. So today we're going to be having our internal industry webinar on demand response. And as I go along, I'll make sure to pause for any questions. Otherwise, you guys can continue either not paying attention or enjoying your lunch. Yeah, hopefully we'll take a nice tour of the demand response market. Okay, first off, key point is, what is demand response? Demand response typically is public transit that's not traditional fixed route. It is what the name is. It is true demand response. So typically calls come in and they're dispatched to various areas based on demand. It's not fixed route, there's no fixed definition, it's a true demand service. And something about demand response is you'll often hear it used interchangeably with paratransit. So really paratransit and demand response are synonymous. So those are two very commonly used interchangeable terms for demand response. And typical types of demand response trips are, general shopping trips, senior center trips, dialysis trips, general purpose trips. There's a wide range of reasons passengers take trips. Now, the question is, well, we have a fixed route. Why is demand response necessary? Really, demand response, one of the key components with demand response is the American Disabilities Act of 1990, and that act was a big civil rights act for people with disabilities. And basically, the ADA does require that demand response service be provided at a comparable level to the fixed route system. So essentially, within a 3/4-mile rule of a fixed route service, there needs to be comparable service for people with disabilities. Typically, there's an eligibility process for who can use this type of service, and very common ADA services within urban areas that have fixed routes. However, a lot of our customers blend between ADA service and non-ADA service. One example is one of the customers out here in Phoenix, and one of the more outskirts areas of Phoenix. They use ADA service, but they also have general service for the general public as well, to help serve those people who either can't get to certain locations or get around town as well. So you'll often find that customers will do a mix of ADA service and non-ADA service, especially in rural areas, where oftentimes in rural areas there may not even be a fixed route. So really, demand response is the only option for people who don't have other means to get to various areas. Okay, and this is a graphic that was pulled directly from the FTA's website. A lot of technical fun language in there. I won't spend much time on it, but it's still a good reference. But it kind of rehashes some of what I've already said, and it kind of discusses some of the different facets of demand response, and also sprinkles in a few key metrics, such as ADA does govern a lot of different, and ADA, and I should say, in government regulation, do govern various things, but also one key thing down the bottom left is subscription service. And first off, understanding and knowing ADA is key in the market, and also, one of the key components we come across a lot is the subscription service, where it's dictated that with all of our agencies, their subscription service may not take up more than 50% of their available capacity, and that's something that often is asked, often is discussed. And basically, what subscription service is it's the reoccurring trips. So they have an appointment Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Those types of reoccurring trips cannot take up more than 50% of total service. Also, just public transit in general, the orange shaded graphic there shows some of the different types of transportation that aren't necessarily considered true public transportation, which is what demand response is. Okay, now to the fun stuff, and you guys are muted, so you won't be able to, say ooh and ah, so I'll just kind of pretend that I'm hearing you. But what is demand response, and how does it differ from, fixed route, flex route? And these are some nice graphics that kind of illustrate on a map what true demand response is. So as this line is popping along here, true demand response, it doesn't operate on a fixed pattern. There's no day-to-day, it must stop at this location, it must go to, these 7 stops in this order with timing points and nodes and blocks and all of that. You can see here it's doing, 2 pickups, which are the up arrows, and also a drop-off. So that is true demand response, and typically agencies will have a number of routes, and a route is just a block of work that a driver in a vehicle are assigned to, and they perform on-demand service either in certain counties, certain zones, and basically they will be going all over the map. And that it does bring us, being TripSpark, into the loop where we provide benefits in that when you have, let's say, 300 trips and 30 vehicles and 30 drivers, how do you transport these passengers in an efficient manner? And so really us being able to do automated scheduling and routing reduces mileage, which reduces their cost per trip. And that is one of the key things, is demand response is a very, very, very high cost per trip market, whereas the cost per trip for demand response is exponentially higher than the cost per trip on fixed routes. So efficiency can definitely save customers a huge amount of money, which is a big return on investment for our automated scheduling software. Okay, so that's demand response. Well, what is fixed route? Nothing too fancy, but on the last slide we saw some on-demand trips. Well, fixed route, it is what it sounds like. There's fixed stops along a predefined pattern. So that kind of starts to show the contrast with demand response. Now, what's key to understand as well is, demand response and fixed route also are linked closely together. You may have heard of flex routing. Well, flex routing basically brings them together. So we have timetabled bus stops here, and those are on a fixed route. You heard me mention earlier that 3/4 of a mile zone where complimentary service must be provided within a 3/4 mile zone of fixed routes. So this is an example of a shading on the map that illustrates that fixed route boundary, or I should say that flex boundary. And then essentially what flex allows is when routes are going along the fixed route, they're able to deviate to pick up passengers that fall within those boundaries. And the term you'll often hear in the market is multimodal. And multimodal is basically the consolidation of types of transport, where there could be a fixed route pickup, there could be a transfer, there could be a 3/4 mile deviation. And so this is how they can potentially link together. So this illustrates flexible routing. Okay, so far we've discussed a little bit about what demand response is, how the Americans with Disabilities Act is important. We've discussed seen illustrated examples of demand response versus fixed route versus flex routing, but what was interesting is as I was preparing for this, I was reviewing some of the other industry solution webinars that had taken place, and really our customers, which Tanya said in the fixed route internal webinar, are essentially closely related. So our customers as well are medium-sized public transit agencies, I can't speak, post-secondary institutions, and also we have customers that are service providers. So examples of public transit agencies, Western Community Action in Marshall, Minnesota, Muncie, Indiana Transit in Muncie, Indiana. The service providers are, MV specifically, First Group, Veolia in certain cases. So a lot of these agencies, public agencies, school agencies such as Yale Transportation, they deploy our software. And so fixed route and demand response are closely related. And as I mentioned earlier, a fixed route trip is much, much cheaper than a demand response trip, which also gets into, when solutions are being looked at for agencies if a fixed route alternative is available. And this is the same, in medical and demand response in various agencies, fixed route can be the preferred mode of travel because it drastically drives down the cost per trip metric. Okay, how do demand response agencies pay for software? What's interesting is I've been, dabbling in the medical industry for a couple of years, and previously, I'd only really worked in demand response, and it's quite, there are some similarities, but it's quite different as far as just some of the funding and also some of the rules and regulations that go around the bid process. And these numbers came directly from the federal website, but roughly $10.7 billion in funding go to transit in the U.S. per year. A lot of, public entities are able to purchase our software based on grant money for capital costs. Some examples are United We Ride, MAP 21, and really some of the key points is really there's typically a tight time frame that they're able to spend this money, and typically, they're sensitive to the ongoing reoccurring costs as well, since initially they get a lot of grant money up front, but they can often be quite sensitive to the reoccurring costs of software. And then one of the big differences in me working on the bid process now for both medical and demand responses, typically demand response, they're very stringent in their RFP, their request for proposal rules, whereas there's a very specific time frame, and also the presentation is very closely regulated, where the amount of time that you get needs to be equivalent to the amount of time that the competition gets, and it's very, very regimented with scoring systems and feedback. Whereas in other industries, sometimes the time from starting sales to actually contracting can be quite quick, which has been illustrated in some of our work with medical brokerages in the past couple of years. A lot of times, the sales cycle can be quite lengthy in demand response. Okay, so now we're going to be switching a little bit from a little bit of an overview on the demand response market to getting into some of our core solutions and offerings, and kind of discussing, well, what does TripSpark bring to satisfy this market? So what are the main components that make up a demand response solution in our demand offering? Well, we start in the top left with our back office, and we'll touch on either of these offerings and what they are, how do they differ, and all of that. But you can see for TripSpark PASS, Novus Demand Response, and Simply our core back office software solutions. PASS has been around for a long, long time, and we currently have the most customers, both in quantity of customers and reoccurring revenue by far in PASS. We also have Novus Demand Response, which is our browser-based solution, which is our current core offering. And we also have Simply Transport, which we have quite a few customers as well, which is our SaaS model, software as a service offering currently. So those are our three current core back office software offerings. In vehicle, we have DriverMate, which is our Android-based tablet solution, and we also have the Rangers, which the Rangers also are deployed on the fixed route side, but we also have Rangers that we use on the demand response side. And since Mentor came on, it's been great having Ranger as a core offering. For those of us who have been around Trapeze and TripSpark for a while, previously we had the Trek units, and then we had some older units as well, and it was welcomed when we were able to include Rangers in our core offerings, which has gone over very well. PASS, Novus DR, Simply, DriverMate, Ranger, those have been around even since the Trapeze TripSpark split. Down at the bottom with the passenger information, both Ripple and Passenger Portal have been developed pretty much within the last year and a half since the split, and it kind of shows kind of the TripSpark way and how we're heading as a company. Ripple is our notifications module, which does imminent arrivals, previous day reminders, texting, and all of that. It's more of a passenger information tool. That's been developed and that's gotten good feedback. And then also our passenger portal, where passengers are able to log in, book, and manage their own trips, and also see real-time information. We'll touch on all of these solutions in greater detail here. Okay, so wanted to touch a little bit on the three main back office solutions, Pass, Novus, and Simply. So really, Pass has been around since the mid-90s. Actually, my first implementation ever in August of 2005 was a Pass DOS to Novus conversion up in Northern California. So when I say Pass was deployed in the mid-90s, that's the Windows-based version of Pass. There's a previous version of Pass DOS, and it even goes a little bit earlier. If you ever want to, the history of really demand response is very, very interesting in our company. But Pass has been the industry-leading product for years. And again, these numbers are estimates, getting data out of Salesforce and everything. These are just estimates, but really 250 total customers, and that's really between Trapeze and TripSpark, but really, the TripSpark, out of all of the past customers, TripSpark has roughly 125 of the current customers. The other 100 plus are enterprise customers, which are the very, very large enterprise sites. Pass is a thick client product, so it has the client server architecture. It is in demand response, the largest TripSpark customer base in maintenance revenue, and with those roughly 125 customers, approximately 3.5 million in annual reoccurring revenue. And again, I actually think that's higher. These numbers are a little bit outdated, and really currently, Pass. Not a ton of new deals with the Pass product, being a legacy product. However, it is still used very frequently with a lot of our service providers. One example being MV. MV actually has Trapeze, TripSpark product managers within their corporate structures, that when MV wins new business, they have templates and they have experts where they pretty much self-deploy Pass. They've had Pass knowledge for 15, 20 years, and if they get new business, they actually self-deploy Pass. So Pass, even though not a ton of new deals still, especially with the service provider end, there still are new installations going in. Novus. Novus was our next generation product, which is browser-based, and I actually started just after it had been deployed for the first time. It was deployed for the first time, technically, I think it was October of 2004, but when I started in mid-2005, we actually had 3 beta sites at the time. And originally, it was developed for the very, very small end of the market. Currently, we have, about 80 current customers and 1.5 million in annual recurring revenue. And then there's also about another 10 or 12 enterprise Novus customers as well, primarily up in the Northwest. Simply actually came out of one of the Trapeze Academies in 2011. It was an initiative that I believe it got 3rd place in the Academy, but it got some funding to be developed. Essentially, Simply is a quote-unquote Novus Lite product for smaller agencies. It is a SaaS model product, software as a service. It was first deployed in 2011, and currently we have approximately 100 customers and 300K in annual maintenance. And really, the difference between Simply and Novus is obviously much reduced functionality. We host 100% of the customers, and essentially, they can sign up online, and within 24 hours, we send them a link. It has training videos and a lot of tools to make it near self-deployable. So really, that's an overview of our 3 current back office solutions. And then really just a little bit more into, well, what are the differences between these products? Why do we need 3? Why is there not 1? And so yeah, PASS essentially, it's the most feature-rich product in the industry. It can do those who support it maybe not. It can do everything that is necessary and then more. It's been around for forever. It has a ton of features and there's not a lot it can't do. Really, in the TripSpark offering, where we're focusing more on the mid-market, smaller agencies, PASS sometimes can be overkill. It does require considerable services to deploy. The architecture being thick client is a little bit difficult. You need Citrix to be able to actually use it on workstations oftentimes, and so really for our market in a lot of ways, it can be considered kind of too much. And with TripSpark, we've been trying to streamline and really have products that are easy to implement, easy to deploy, easy to maintain, so on and so forth. Novus, really, it was built originally specifically for smaller agencies. I won't call it necessarily mid-market. Originally in 2004, it was developed honestly for sub-200 trip a day agencies, and over the years, it's been added onto considerably to be able to handle agencies as small as 20 trips a day up to agencies upwards of 10,000 trips a day. And really with TripSpark, the services teams, the development teams, and the various teams have been working hard to streamline Novus to be able to make it easier to train, easier to deploy, to reduce the amount of time from contract signing to implementation, and also reduce the amount of effort it takes to deploy it. And really, one of the key differences between PASS and Novus is Novus being a browser-based architecture and PASS being the thick client. One key thing to note, and this is often brought up, is PASS and Novus, they share the algorithm code. One of the key things within TripSpark is our demand response algorithm, and both PASS and Novus do essentially utilize the same algorithm. So, if you're scheduling with PASS or you're scheduling with Novus, you're using that same industry-leading algorithm. Simply, the biggest difference is no automated scheduling. Automated scheduling can be complex to implement. It does up the services, it does up the support, and so really the big difference is no automated scheduling, and really simply is utilized as a inexpensive, kind of low overhead starting point for demand response agencies. And the hope is that more and more Simply sites, we have done Simply to Novus conversions, we've done PASS to Novus conversions, we've even done Novus to PASS conversions, but really with Simply the key is, as agencies grow, it is the same framework, Simply and Novus, so it is a straightforward process to move a Simply agency to the Novus demand response architecture. So this, the purpose of this slide was to try to illustrate where TripSpark is headed. So you can see on the top row there, we have PASS, Novus, Demand Response, and Simply. And underneath, we have a lot of the add-on modules that we have within the product. And so, and I think I'm actually missing a couple within PASS, but as you can see, PASS has a ton of add-ons. It has a ton of components that can be added on. With Novus, and actually this list has been consolidated since we did the TripSpark split, but you can see with Novus we have a much more focused list of add-ons that that we bring to market, and then Simply right now is not very modular at all to keep it very straightforward. So really, with TripSpark, to make it easier to understand, easier to deploy, and not have all of those, well, if you need this, you need to add this. We've really tried to simplify and streamline not only our products, but also our product offerings to really position ourselves within the mid-market. Okay, so, and again, we're not going to do, whenever you're working with me, typically I'm doing a demo of various software. Don't worry, we're not going to be given a demo today. But PASS, this is a screen capture of some of the main screens on PASS. So you can see, does look a little bit dated in today's day and age, but you know, this shows the trip booking screen, some of the client registration screen, and then some of schedule editor. So this puts a visual to what the Pass product is. If those who, I know a lot of people on this call, they've seen Pass before, but if you haven't seen Pass before, this puts a visual to the Pass product, and this is actually showing version 14. Version 15 is the current release of Pass, and you know, quite different than some of the main TripSpark product offerings. But you can see all of the buttons on the top row, and I know we have people on this call who, without seeing the tooltips, could tell me what every single one of those buttons is and what they do. So Pass is a extremely powerful tool. If you're a power user of Pass, you will always have a job in transit, as you know, Pass is very widely deployed and you know, has been around in the market for a long time. So now this is a screen capture of some of the main screens of our Novus Demand Response product. So you can see, you know, has the browser-based architecture, you know, has a lot more configuration options, still has the algorithm behind it, but really what's nice is what we can see towards the bottom is almost a shopping cart of different pieces of the software, and we can really tailor it to be streamlined based on who we're implementing for. So that's just a screen capture of the home screen, some of the action screens, the same schedule editor screen as in Pass in kind of the left side of the screen, and then our dispatching screen within Novus Demand Response. You also see I had probably unintentionally I included some of the medical functionality, but you know, Novus Med has been the product we've been working on within the medical industry, and really within Novus Med, we've taken a lot of the power of Novus, and we've been transforming it into more of a medically focused product. And so a lot of those medical tasks actually would only be available if you have the Novus Med product. And then Simply, as we can see, looks pretty similar on cursory look as Novus Demand Response. I've tried to illustrate what the differences are. You can see in the top left, that's an example of our configuration wizard, where basically right when customers purchase the software, they're led through a wizard to basically self-configure. We have Video Learning Center, where if you're ever bored or have free time, go ahead and ask to watch the Simply videos. You will hear a couple hours of me hopped up on caffeine trying to teach people Simply. So essentially with Simply we had you know, 3 ways that we tried to help train clients instead of being on site. One was the configuration wizard to basically guide customers through configuration, the video learning to kind of illustratively show them how to use the software, and then also within the configuration wizard we have context sensitive help available as well, where when they're configuring, if they have any questions, there will be help right then and there on that topic they're trying to work with that they can click on, such as if you're setting up runs, for example, you can, there'll be a button there that says, what are runs? How do I set up runs? Why are runs important? So a lot of tools built specifically to try to allow customers to self-configure so we can keep the costs low and we don't have to be sending people on site for a SaaS model product. And then you can see towards the bottom of the screen here, you know, there are very, very few screens available. So within Simply, we reduced a lot of the capabilities in order to keep the product straightforward, and we're very cautious in our approach, and that there does come a line in the sand where, you know, they have to move to Novus to take advantage of a lot of the advanced functionality. So next, I just wanted to briefly touch on some of the in-vehicle technologies. So our 2 main offerings are DriverMate and Rangers, and they each have their advantages and disadvantages in the market. On the left, that's an example screenshot of DriverMate, which will essentially run on any recent Android tablet, phone, you know, any device that's running Android. And you know, DriverMate was deployed first, I believe, 5 or 6 years ago, and really the big selling point with it is you know, the initial cost, in that you know, you don't have to wire it into your vehicle, you don't have to wire in a GPS unit. Essentially, if you have a tablet or a phone, you can install the app, you can log in, and drivers will be able to, you know, arrive their trips, perform their trips, and reap all the benefits of an onboard solution. So really, in a lot of our mid-market bids, due to pricing, you know, DriverMate will be the preferred solution because it is much lower upfront cost. Whereas if we bid Rangers, you know, Rangers are not cheap upfront, so a lot of times that can drive up the cost in our mid-market bids. So, you know, a lot of the bids we do bid DriverMate. However, some of the bids do call for actual devices that were built specifically for transit, which is what Rangers are. And Rangers, you know, they meet all of the technical specifications, you know, shockproof, they can handle all the weather, and they will have a much longer device lifespan. And that's one of the things that when we're selling Rangers, we try to project is if you look at the, you know, 7 to 10 year cost of ownership for Rangers versus DriverMate is honestly, in most cases, Rangers will be the better fit because they're designed for transit. They're going to last a lot longer, whereas, you know, DriverMate and Android devices weren't built specifically for transit. You can put cases on them, you can try to ruggedize them, but overall, you will have to replace DriverMate devices. They're also not wired in, so sometimes they're lost, sometimes they're stolen if agencies don't secure them properly. So really there are pros and cons. And one other thing I guess that I haven't mentioned is some folks on the phone may not know, well, why do agencies use DriverMate and Rangers? And essentially, for those who aren't familiar with this, they are onboard solutions that are on the vehicle that provide synchronous connection to a PASS or a Novus. So essentially, a driver logs on, and you can see in the screenshot on the left, they will see a list of their trips for the day, and as they're going and picking up passengers, they will be pushing a button that says, I've picked up Bob Ross, I've loaded him, I'm moving on, and it will send back to the scheduling software the time they picked them up, the odometer reading. Will be getting GPS coordinates as they're going along so agencies can see their vehicles on the map. And when passengers cancel or added onto a schedule, they will get pop-ups that allow for synchronous information. So logically, after the software solution is deployed, DriverMate and Ranger onboard computers, or MDTs as they're called, are the next logical step, with the return on investment being having more accurate reporting since you're having actual times and odometers in the system, reducing radio traffic, and also you're not having to print paper anymore. So DriverMate and Ranger are a very, very popular add-on for agencies. And before I move on, I should probably mention, I should put in, we also, you may have noticed on the grid a few slides ago, but we also have Simply Mobile. And one of the things we've dabbled in as well is basically a no-install mobile solution. And Simply Mobile essentially is a browser-based solution that can work with Simply or Novus, that doesn't require Android, doesn't require anything to be installed, doesn't require a proxy. Essentially, it's something that a driver can log in, it's mobile friendly, and they can see their trips on the browser. And that's something that has been popular with Simply. We're looking to adapt that to Novus to be to allow a very simple mobile solution standard with our products. So that's something we're looking at as we move forward, is, you know, how can we improve our initial offering by including a very simple offering, whereas if they need the full functionality, they can still take advantage of DriverMate or Rangers.
Joe, we just have a quick question. Someone's asking, do you have any plans to make DriverMate compatible with Apple?
That's a good question, and currently, no. We do get asked that on occasion. Then we also get asked, you know, what about Windows Phone support? But it is quite expensive to develop and get approved on the Apple Store, and we found that by not supporting Apple, we're not necessarily excluding ourselves from opportunities. I think really as we move forward, by having an offering, kind of like when we went browser-based, we made ourselves operating system agnostic. We don't care if they're Windows or Apple. By having long-term, looking at browser-based on-board solutions, then we would take out the Android versus Apple versus Windows Phone operating system. So currently, no plans to move forward with Apple. Okay, so that's a little bit about the excuse me, the in-vehicle solutions. Next, Ripple, and as I had mentioned, this is one of the solutions that's been developed since the TripSpark Trapeze split, and this, as well the passenger portal, have honestly gotten rave reviews from prospects, customers, and really historically a notification system, or sometimes interchangeably called an IVR solution, has always been a little bit scary for mid-market agencies because of hardware requirements, because of how long it takes to deploy, because needing technical staff or support to always make changes. Well, what's nice about Ripple is the team basically built a self-installed tool that can connect to any of our I shouldn't have said compatible with all DR products, but it's not only compatible with our DR products, but also our medical products as well, that provides outbound and inbound notifications to customers. So what you see on the screen here is a screenshot that kind of illustrates in the top left notification types, the text, the voice, and the email look and feel. But essentially, example of this is when a passenger calls up and they book a trip. After that trip is booked, do they get an email sent to them similar to this email that basically gives them a receipt of their booking? Another example is the night before, between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m., does the system call them automatically to read off their trips for the next day and also give them the option to cancel their trip? Because, if they cancel a trip the night before, that cancellation could have resulted into a no-show, and no-shows are extremely high cost for all transit agencies. And then another popular type is the imminent arrival, and a lot of these systems are very complementary to one another. So if you have, for example, Novus, and you also have DriverMate, you know where the vehicle is, so the system will be able to detect when the bus is, let's say, 10 minutes away from pickup, and it can call the passenger and say, the bus will be arriving soon, please be ready to go. And you multiply that by 100, 200, 700 pickups a day. If that solution is able to reduce your dwell time, which is the amount of time you're stopped waiting to pick up a passenger, even by a minute, that in of itself will pay for the system over the long run. So, and the big change between Ripple versus the legacy Trapeze system is it does work completely with a cloud-based provider. So all of the delivery of messages, the voice, we interface with a cloud-based provider. So there's no actual IVR hardware infrastructure. We basically do it through the third party, which greatly streamlines deployment. I think we're deploying this in 60% less of the time as our traditional solution.
Joe, I have a quick question. It's Jen. Who can I go prod for a little more information on the sales side of Ripple?
You can bug me, you could bug Cameron, Brent, so you can start with me and then we can go from there.
Thank you.
Next, our passenger portal. Those who have been in the company for a while may have heard of Novus or PassWeb, which is our legacy product. This has also been developed since the TripSpark split, and again, self-installer, very easy to deploy. I actually set this up on my demo server a couple of weeks ago in about 5 minutes. It's got a fantastic wizard-based approach to installing, and essentially what the passenger portal, it is what it sounds like. It allows passengers to log in, and you can see on the left side of the screen there's some common actions. They can review their trips, they can book their trips, they can see bulletins that have been posted by the transit agency. They can update their profile, and essentially it provides an external facing website. Typically this would be linked to from the transit agency's website, and based on, they can be given a login, and based on the login they'll be able to see their trips, manage their trips, and then some of the features that have been added that have gone over very well, which is shown here on the screen, is when the vehicle is in imminent arrival status, you can enable to allow the passenger to see exactly where the vehicle is. They can click or touch on their mobile device to see what vehicle is coming, and also this was developed in technology that is mobile friendly. I've used it on my 5-inch screen phone, my 8-inch screen tablet, and my computer, and it's very, very mobile friendly. And similar to Ripple, and we can't emphasize enough how important this is. It's real good with self-administration as well. Before demonstrations, if you've sat in on any of the demos that I do or Cameron does or whoever does, you'll see that a lot of times we'll change the banner, we'll change the logo to the company we're presenting to's logo. We'll use their color scheme. All of the look and feel and properties are very self-administrative, so they're very easy to adjust. And certain policy rules, like different demand response agencies will have a different cutoff window on when passengers can book trips. They can only book trips up to so far in advance. They only allow passengers to cancel trips on the web if they're greater than 6 hours from now, and all of these are self-administration properties. So as agencies deploy this for the first time and they see how it goes, they'll be able to adapt and evolve as their customer base dictates. So again, this is a great solution as well. And then we're also coming up here in the next quarter, we're going to be adding our version of quote-unquote the worker module. It won't be called that. If you knew the legacy solution, there was the worker module, and that essentially allows other entities to log in on behalf of customers or groups of customers to manage their trips as well. So it's very, very applicable in demand response, even more so in the medical industry. But for example, you could have a medical facility that needs to be able to log in and manage the trips of passengers who travel to their medical facility. So we'll be working on that edition of the product over the next quarter, and we're excited about that. Okay, competitive landscape. Don't want to get too deep into this, but really this is probably more of a subset. I wouldn't say I've seen a lot of different competitors in the industry, but typically when we come up in our bids, RouteMatch always, especially in the mid-market, is a big competitor of ours. They're an Atlanta-based company. I actually, just about a month ago, saw one of their latest versions of the software, which is a thick client software. Not as feature-rich, however, there are some similarities with their offerings, and really, whenever we come up against RouteMatch, they in the industry, they're often seen as they are very sales focused. They don't tend to put a lot of their money into development or the algorithm, but usually you'll see at least 30 sales reps at all of their booths just kind of sitting there. So they definitely come up in a lot of the bids. And then Ecolane over the last number of years has come up as well. They're actually a Finland-based company. They now have U.S. offices because they didn't want to be known as a kind of a foreign company. So they're Finland-based, and they claim to have some scientists who've developed a new leading algorithm, but they also do offer a browser-based solution as well. So RouteMatch and Ecolane do come up quite often. Others that come up, Stratagen, Mobilitat, CTS, PTMS, Transked. Some have these one-off kind of in-house systems, but those are a lot of the competitors that we see in the market. And then also a lot of the service providers, in many cases, they are partners and customers, but they also can be competitors, whereas especially Veolia and First more so, they've in some of the areas they've developed some of their own softwares on some of the demand response functionality that they not only use for all of their contracts, but they put out there in the market as well. So it's kind of an interesting relationship with some of the service providers, because oftentimes they'll look at what we have and decide on a build versus buy, or you know, they may want a certain component of ours. So we do work extensively with a lot of the various service providers. And then kind of why TripSpark? You know, why, okay, we've seen the competitors, we've seen a lot of the features and functionality. What are some of the things that set TripSpark apart? And really, if you had to ask me one thing in demand response, it is the algorithm. I mean, that is the one thing that it's kind of the holy grail of demand response over the years, that our algorithm by far is the most proven, it's the most flexible, it's the most well known in the market, that, you know, 20 plus years of R&D and improvements have gone into, so that definitely is a competitive advantage for us. And then other things, you know, customer care, investment in research and development, and then really the TripSpark specific one that we threw in here, which is starting to, you know, we're really focusing on, as is illustrated by Ripple, the passenger portal, and what we're trying to do, and what we've been doing with reducing the amount of time it takes to deploy Novus DR, is really the streamlined deployment. And then what kind of piggybacks off of that is really spending time on ease of use as well. Okay, and then the boring slide that we don't need to spend any time on, that is more for references, is I listed a lot of the websites that I did as I was putting together, or I researched, I should say, as I was putting together this presentation, and that I often visit as well. Some of the key ones being the FTA website, and then kind of one of the first things, and this is what I had done when I first started with the company, is I went to the TCRP, Transportation Cooperative Research Panel, and basically started reading all of the literature, because they do some great studies on demand response metrics, ADA rules, and how they relate to transit, and I definitely advise those who are interested in demand response, who are new to the industry, to take these websites and spend some reading time in them, because they're very, very beneficial. And that was what I had for today. It looks like we're doing well on time, so hopefully it was a useful overview of demand response, our offerings, and other various topics. So I will open it up to any other questions. Otherwise, I will go eat lunch.
Joe, just a quick question came in from the West Coast. I thought I would pass it on. It says, perhaps I missed this, but what is the average deployment time for a Novus installation?
That's a good question. My answer is, obviously it's dependent on a number of factors, such as availability, data conversions, a lot of other things, but I would say the average time from contract signing to deployment is approximately 3 months. And that, again, highly variable. We're often put in contracts, we're required to deploy within a number of time, but you know, that typically accounts for time as you know, we're going to have to convert data from an external system, so we have to kind of do the data mapping. Typically, customers will have to get hardware set up if they're going to be about 99% of our demand response customers host the software themselves, and a lot of these agencies, as part of the bids, are purchasing hardware, so they're having to get hardware set up, and then usually there's a couple of on-site visits that have to be scheduled in as well. So a lot of it's just mapping out enough time to do you know, allow enough time for the data and the technical setup, the training, and then really getting the customer comfortable with the system, because, you know, once they flip that on switch, they're running their day-to-day business on our software, and it's a mission. That's one thing I should have put in this. This is a absolutely mission-critical service. You are transporting people with disabilities, and you do not want to miss pickups. You want the system to be deployed properly, because otherwise you're on the news. Good question.
I'm sure that answers it. Also, though, I mean, I know that Ripple and the passenger portal deploy really quickly, though, too, as like separate modules.
Yeah, absolutely. And the back office solution is the longest deployment. It's really the hub, if you will, of everything. But you know, I think, and again, people who are working on those products may kill me if I say the wrong number, but I'll say anyway. But I know with Ripple and the passenger portal, I mean, we're down to 2 weeks or less for total deployment number of days. So I mean, they're really expedited, and I know Steve has also done a great job in reducing even the number of on-site days it takes to deploy Novus, and DriverMate again is a lot quicker. So really, once you have that core system, a lot of the add-on modules can be deployed quite quickly.
Joe, I got a question. Unfortunately, it's not a TripSpark question; it's an Ecolane question. Hopefully. So I did an Ecolane project many moons ago, and at the time they had a fairly dynamic system where they basically didn't seem to schedule anything out more than like an hour in advance. When we were putting in Rangers, we basically had to install everything and flip the switch for about 40 vehicles, which was a novelty for us at the time. Can you comment on like how they schedule versus how we schedule? Like I understand that we do things far in advance. It's possible to have a paper manifest and that kind of thing. Is that something that Ecolane can do, or like what are the differences between what we do and what they do?
I think a lot of what they do, and it can be similar, is we both have the ability to have kind of dispatcherless scheduling if it's deployed. So essentially it can take trips on a timer and keep trying to schedule them, or look for trips in various criteria and try to schedule them. So we have some similarities there. I think the big difference is kind of how it considers scheduling solutions and kind of the heuristic algorithm design and what factors it considers. So essentially our algorithm is more exhaustive in how it's searching for potential solutions versus Ecolane. However, Ecolane, and again, I haven't seen the innards of their algorithm, or what I've seen, they have a decent algorithm, but it's not as exhaustive when it's considering what efficiency is, what metrics kind of play into efficiency, and how the final solution is determined. We have a extremely exhaustive search that goes in. It may not be the best answer, but that's a very layered question, so hopefully it's a little bit of an overview.
Okay.
Sorry, and Waylon, I think IM'd me something. I don't know if I was supposed to read that.
It's asking if Rangers are open source.
By well, I guess Rangers, we only deploy them using our software. They do run off of a Windows CE operating system, but it isn't per se open source.
I think that may be it, Joe.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your time, and yeah, hopefully it was useful.